Stop, I will be your obedient wife, the Apache widow who defied fate. The sun rose early and burned hot, but it never seemed to chase away the strength that lived in her heart. Her family was small, but it was full of love and laughter. She remembered the stories her mother told by the fire, stories of courage, of survival, of women who held their families together when the world seemed determined to pull them apart. From a young age, she learned that life could be hard, but it could also be beautiful if she faced it with courage. She learned to carry both sorrow and joy as if they were two stones in the palm of her hand, heavy yet balanced. Her childhood was full of simple joys. She would chase butterflies in the meadows, listen to the birds' songs, and help her mother gather herbs from the hills. She had a special place near a stream where she would sit for hours, watching the water move over stones worn smooth by time. She felt connected to everything around her, the wind that whispered through the trees, the sun that warmed her skin, the quiet strength of the hills that never moved but stood firm. Even then, she knew life demanded patience and quiet courage. She did not yet know how much she would need it. When she was still very young, she met the man who would one day become her husband. He was gentle and kind, yet there was a quiet strength in his eyes that drew her in. They shared smiles and small conversations, the kind that slowly build into trust and affection. In their community, marriage was not just a union of two people. It was a joining of families, of traditions, of history. She learned the importance of respect, not just for her husband, but for the life they were about to create together. She also learned that love was not only about joy, it was about commitment, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand together through hardships. She felt ready for it, unaware of how sudden and cruel fate could be. Their wedding was a simple ceremony, held under the open sky, with the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and the songs of distant birds. Friends and family gathered around, offering blessings and smiles. She felt a joy that filled her chest and made her heart pound. She believed truly that life could not be more perfect. For a time, it seemed as though every worry had been swept away by the gentle hands of happiness. She and her husband shared quiet nights talking about their dreams, mornings filled with laughter, and days of small, shared adventures. She felt safe, loved, and alive in a way she had never known before. But life, she would soon learn, does not always follow the path we hope for. One day, her world changed forever. Her husband fell ill suddenly, a sickness that no medicine could seem to cure. Days passed with worry pressing on her chest, each moment stretching longer than the last. She tried to hold on to hope, whispered prayers into the wind, and sat by his side, holding his hand as if her touch could keep him here. But fate was unyielding. In a single, quiet morning, he was gone. The air around her seemed heavier, and the colors of the world dulled. She felt an emptiness so deep that words could not touch it, a silence so complete that even the songs of the birds seemed distant and unreachable. The days after his death were some of the hardest she had ever faced. She moved through her home, and the hills surrounding it as if in a dream, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt strange and hollow. The herbs she used to gather, the path by the stream, the small fire where she had once listened to her mother's stories, all of it felt like reminders of what she had lost. Friends and family came to offer comfort, their faces filled with sympathy and gentle words, but their words could not reach the hollow place in her heart. People whispered that she must move on, that life must continue, that she must follow the path expected of a widow in their community. But how could she move on when her life had been so violently split in two? She realized that being a widow in her world was not simply about grieving. It meant entering a new life, one that came with rules she had not chosen. People expected her to be quiet, to stay home, to follow customs without question. Her every move was watched, judged, and measured against what others thought she should do. She felt the weight of their eyes, a constant reminder that her future was no longer her own. She had to live according to tradition, even when her heart longed to run free, to find her own way, to make her own choices. It was a life of invisible chains, woven not from iron but from expectation and custom. Even in her grief, she discovered a strange strength within herself. She began to notice small things, how she could carry water up the hill with ease, how she could sew clothes that fit perfectly, how she could cook meals that warmed more than just the stomach. She realized that life, though painful, still offered moments where she could exert control, where her will mattered. Each small victory, each small act of independence became a brick in the foundation of a strength she did not yet fully understand. She began to see that even as a widow, even in the shadow of sorrow, she had power. The power to endure, the power to survive, the power to quietly shape her own destiny. Her days became a rhythm of quiet work and deeper reflection. She rose with the sun, tending to chores, preparing food, and caring for the small animals and plants she had grown to love. Her nights were for memories, both sweet and painful. Sometimes she would sit by the stream where she had played as a child, watching the water move endlessly over smooth stones. She would imagine her husband there beside her, smiling, laughing, whispering words she could no longer hear. And yet, even in that solitude, there was a sense of peace. She began to understand that grief did not need to consume her. She could honor the love she had lost while still moving forward, still finding moments of quiet joy and purpose. The people in her community watched her closely. Some admired her resilience, though they did not say it aloud. Others whispered, questioning whether she would ever truly obey the customs expected of her. They did not know that her silence and quiet work were not signs of weakness, but of wisdom. She was learning the delicate balance between living within tradition and finding her own voice. Each day became a lesson in patience, courage, and understanding. She realized that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. Her heart, though scarred by loss, began to carry hope in small, hidden ways. She started dreaming again, not just of the past, but of what she might become. Perhaps she would never have the life she once imagined, but perhaps she could create a new life, one that honored her love and her loss while still allowing her to exist fully. She understood that sorrow could be a companion without being a master. She learned that fate could be faced with courage, and that even a life shaped by loss could hold meaning, dignity, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. In those first years after her husband's death, she became known not only as a widow, but as a woman of quiet strength. Her neighbors began to see her not just as a figure of pity, but as a person who had endured more than most and yet remained unbroken. Her story, though still her own secret, began to ripple through her community like a soft wind through the hills. She had entered a world that seemed to demand submission, yet she had already started to bend it, not with rebellion, but with wisdom, patience, and the quiet power of her heart. The journey she was on had only just begun, and even as sorrow lingered, the path ahead held the promise of courage, choice, and a life she would learn to claim for herself. Life for her became a careful balance between following tradition and holding on to her own sense of self. The community watched every step she took, waiting to see if she would follow the rules expected of a widow or quietly bend under the weight of sorrow. In many ways, she did what was asked. She rose early, tended to the house, worked in the fields, and spoke softly to the elders who came to check on her. She obeyed outwardly, yet inside her heart, a storm was quietly growing. She was learning that life demanded not just endurance but cleverness, that survival sometimes meant acting within limits while quietly testing the boundaries. The elders of the community often reminded her of her place. They told her she must stay home, not seek companionship, and live a quiet life in obedience. They said these things with calm voices, but their words carried weight. They expected her to accept her fate, and the message was clear. A widow's life was not her own. At first, she felt the sting of anger and sadness. She wanted to speak, to argue, to demand the freedom she felt in her heart. But she understood that direct defiance could bring harm, that survival sometimes required patience and strategy. She learned to navigate her world carefully, observing, listening, and acting with a quiet intelligence that few could recognize at first. Even as she obeyed, she noticed how her mind wandered. She remembered her husband in the mornings, in the small chores, in the quiet moments when no one was watching. She remembered the sound of his laughter, the way he would brush her hair from her face, and the gentle touch of his hand. The memories were both comfort and pain. They reminded her of what she had lost, but they also reminded her of the love she had carried. She realized that these memories could give her strength. They could guide her in moments of fear and doubt. She began to see that the traditions she was expected to follow did not have to erase her past or her feelings. They could coexist if she moved wisely. Over time, the whispers began. People noticed when she walked through the village with her head held high, when her hands worked skillfully in the fields, when she spoke politely but with confidence to others. Some admired her strength quietly, others questioned it. Rumors started to spread when she was seen speaking with a man who was not part of her family or the circle of elders who monitored her life. At first, these were just casual conversations, shared as neighbors exchanged news or helped each other with work. But in a community where every action is observed and weighed, small moments could take on big meanings. The whispers grew louder, and the weight of expectation pressed even more heavily on her shoulders. She felt the tension sharply, like the pull of the wind against a sail. She was not doing anything wrong, yet the eyes of the community judged her with suspicion. She realized that life for a woman in her position was rarely simple. She could not move freely without careful thought. She could not speak without considering how her words would be interpreted, and she could not act without thinking of the consequences. Every small choice became a test of her strength and wisdom. And she learned that strength was not just physical or emotional, it was also strategic. She had to learn when to obey, when to wait, and when to speak, for the wrong move could bring not just criticism but danger. In the midst of this struggle, she discovered small victories that built her confidence. She found ways to help others in the community, offering advice to younger women, tending to the sick, or guiding children through learning traditions and skills. She began to see that her influence was growing quietly. That respect could be earned not through loud defiance but through skill, care, and consistency. People started to notice her not just as a widow, but as a woman whose presence mattered. Slowly, she was shaping her own space in the community, a space where she could act and speak in ways that felt true to her heart while still honoring the rules she could not break. Despite this growing sense of control, the pressure from tradition remained. She was reminded that her life was supposed to be quiet, obedient, and limited. Marriage, companionship, or even bold actions were not expected of her. Elders would speak of duty and fate, of a widow's proper role, as if her personal desires had no weight. In public, she listened and agreed, but in private, her mind and heart rebelled. She asked herself difficult questions. Why should she not have the right to decide her own path? Why must grief chain her to silence and obedience? How could she live fully if the world insisted she live as if she were invisible? These questions were dangerous in a community that valued conformity, but they were also the spark that kept her spirit alive. Then came the moments that tested her patience and cunning. She was approached by a man who had long admired her from a distance. He spoke with respect, carefully observing the boundaries she maintained. At first, their interactions were brief and careful, polite exchanges in public, careful not to attract attention. Yet even these small moments gave her a sense of life returning to her heart. She realized she could navigate the expectations of her community and still experience connection, conversation, and thought. She learned to mask her true feelings while observing the reactions of others, testing the edges of what was allowed without breaking the rules outright. This was a delicate dance, requiring wisdom, courage, and careful timing. She also discovered that her strength was visible in subtle ways. Her ability to manage her household, care for animals, work in the fields, and maintain her composure in difficult situations made others notice her quietly. Younger women looked to her for guidance, and even some men began to respect her not just as a widow, but as a person of authority and skill. She realized that true power was not always about confrontation or loud words. It could be quiet, patient, and persistent. Her influence grew like a hidden river beneath the surface, shaping the world around her without drawing direct attention. She understood that life did not always reward boldness with safety, but careful wisdom could create freedom in ways that rebellion never could. Rumors continued to circulate, and not all attention was kind. Some people whispered about impropriety, about the danger of stepping outside the role of a widow. These whispers could have been crushing, but she learned to let them slide like water over her skin. She focused on her own path, her own understanding of duty and independence. She realized that the world would always judge, that people would always talk, but her own heart was the place where true freedom and strength were nurtured. She began to see that fate was not a fixed chain, but something she could navigate with patience, intelligence, and courage. Obedience did not mean surrender. It could be a tool, a shield, and a strategy. The days and weeks turned into months and months into years. She continued to live within the traditions expected of her, but in her mind and heart, she was quietly shaping a life of her own design. She learned to balance duty with desire, expectation with independence, grief with hope. Every small choice she made, every careful conversation, every act of skill or kindness became a statement of her power. She understood that the world might not recognize her strength immediately, but over time, it would be seen and felt. She began to see herself not just as a widow defined by loss, but as a woman capable of influence, action, and even subtle rebellion that did not break her spirit or endanger her life. By the time the community began to see the depth of her wisdom and patience, she had already discovered that her life did not need to be dictated entirely by others. She had learned the art of survival within strict boundaries, the skill of quiet defiance, and the power of self-respect and patience. Though the expectations of tradition were strong, she was discovering that she could navigate them with intelligence and grace. Her journey had taught her that true strength is measured not by the ease of life, but by the courage to endure, to observe, and to act wisely when the moment is right. And even though she still carried the sorrow of her loss, she had begun to glimpse a future shaped not solely by fate, but by her own careful choices, courage, and quiet determination. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, but beneath the surface, tension had been building. She had lived for years following the customs of her community, obeying the rules expected of a widow, yet carefully testing the boundaries of what she could do without causing open conflict. Each day she observed and learned, quietly understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the people around her. She had grown wiser, more patient, and more confident in herself, but the world was still full of challenges. Fate, she knew, could be cruel and unpredictable, and she had already felt its harsh touch. She had learned to endure sorrow, but now she would learn that courage often required more than endurance. It required boldness at the right moment. The man who had quietly shown respect and admiration for her for some time began to spend more moments near her. He did not force attention or affection upon her. He approached with patience and care, aware of the delicate position she occupied. The villagers noticed, as they always did, and their whispers grew louder. Some were critical, some curious, and some secretly impressed by her ability to handle the situation with grace. She understood that these interactions were dangerous in a world where even a small misstep could bring scandal or judgment. But she also felt a spark of something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of possibility, a chance to claim some measure of her own life. The tension between caution and desire became sharper, more urgent, as the days passed. It was during one quiet afternoon, while she was working near the edge of the village, that the moment came. She had been tending to the small garden she had nurtured with care, pulling weeds, planting new seeds, and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. The man approached, walking slowly so as not to startle her. He spoke gently, asking how she was, sharing small observations about the world around them. Their conversation was ordinary to anyone who might have overheard it, yet to her, every word carried the weight of potential, the sense that life could shift dramatically in a single moment. She felt her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with awareness that the time had come to act decisively. The elders arrived soon after, summoned by neighbors who had noticed the meeting. Their presence was a reminder of the rules she had lived by all her adult life. They expected obedience, submission, and quiet compliance. The tension in the air was palpable, and she could feel the eyes of the community pressing upon her like the heat of the sun on a summer afternoon. For a brief moment, she considered retreating, pretending to be the obedient widow who had done nothing to attract attention. But she also realized that this moment demanded courage, that her life, and her ability to shape it, depended on how she responded. She drew in a deep breath, feeling the strength she had cultivated over years of hardship and patience. Then she spoke. The words came not from fear or desperation, but from intelligence, strategy, and inner power. "Stop. I will be your obedient wife," she said, loud enough for everyone present to hear. At first, there was a stunned silence. The elders froze, the neighbors whispered in shock, and even the man who had been standing beside her looked at her with wide eyes. The phrase seemed simple, yet it carried layers of meaning. On the surface, it appeared to affirm submission and compliance, but in truth, it was a masterstroke of cleverness. She was claiming her place within the world's expectations, while also asserting her right to choose her path, to shape her own life within the constraints of tradition. Her words had an immediate effect. The elders, who had expected either obedience or defiance, were forced to reconsider. She had not rebelled openly, and yet she had taken control. The man, understanding the depth of her strategy, bowed his head in respect and relief. The neighbors, initially shocked, began to murmur in admiration for her courage and intelligence. She had spoken carefully, knowing that words were as powerful as actions, and that in a community governed by tradition, the right phrase could shift perception and open possibilities that had once seemed closed forever. She had learned that obedience could be a tool, that outward compliance did not mean surrender, and that wisdom could turn even the strictest rules to one's advantage. After that moment, the atmosphere shifted subtly but irrevocably. The elders no longer spoke to her with the same intensity, no longer questioned her every movement. They realized slowly that she was not a woman to be easily controlled, yet she was not openly rebellious. Her obedience was a strategy, her compliance a sign of intelligence rather than weakness. She moved with renewed confidence, her presence carrying the quiet authority that came from understanding the world and mastering it in ways others could not immediately see. Her heart, once burdened by sorrow and fear, felt lighter. She knew that life had given her an opportunity to assert herself without anger, without confrontation, and without loss of dignity. The man she had spoken to grew closer, but carefully, respecting the boundaries she had set with her clever declaration. Their relationship became a delicate partnership, built on mutual respect and shared understanding. She began to see that trust and patience were more powerful than impulsive action, and that love could flourish even within the strictest confines if approached with care. She was learning that life was not simply about survival, but about strategy, intelligence, and the ability to find joy and fulfillment within the spaces available. Her courage in that single moment had opened doors, but the real work was in maintaining balance, patience, and careful observation. In the weeks that followed, she noticed subtle changes in the community's behavior. People no longer spoke of her in hushed tones of judgment. They began to acknowledge her skill, her patience, and her quiet wisdom. Younger women, in particular, watched her closely, sensing that she had discovered a way to live fully even within strict tradition. She realized that her actions had a ripple effect, showing others that courage, intelligence, and careful strategy could change perceptions and create opportunities that seemed impossible. She had not sought fame or recognition, yet her presence now carried weight in ways she had not imagined. At the same time, she continued to honor her past. Her husband's memory remained a constant companion, guiding her choices and reminding her of the love she had known. She learned that the past need not imprison her. It could be a source of strength, a foundation upon which she could build a life that was both respectful of tradition and true to her heart. Every day, she balanced the memories of loss with the possibilities of the present, carefully observing the world around her and making choices that reflected both courage and wisdom. Life was no longer simply about obedience or sorrow. It had become a careful, deliberate dance between tradition, desire, and strategy. The moment she had spoken those words became a turning point, not just for her, but for her community. They saw that a woman could obey outwardly while still asserting her will, that intelligence and courage could coexist with respect and tradition. She had reshaped their understanding of what a widow could be, and in doing so, she had reshaped her own life. The balance she had cultivated, between obedience and independence, tradition and self-determination, became her defining strength. She understood that fate could be faced not with fear or submission alone, but with careful, deliberate courage, and that a single, well-chosen action could change the course of a life. Her story, though quiet and subtle, began to inspire those around her. People who had once doubted her strength began to recognize her wisdom. She was no longer simply a widow. She was a woman of influence, intelligence, and courage. The respect she earned was not loud or public, but it was real and lasting. She had learned that true power often operates in silence, that quiet courage can be more effective than open defiance, and that the world can be changed by patience, careful observation, and bold decisions made at the right moment. Her life, once defined by sorrow and expectation, was now a testament to the power of strategic courage and inner strength. And so, as the seasons changed and the days grew longer, she continued to live with awareness and purpose. Every action she took, every word she spoke, was informed by the lessons she had learned. The moment she had boldly declared her obedience while claiming her choice became a symbol of her strength and wisdom. She had discovered that fate was not something imposed upon her without recourse. It was something she could navigate, influence, and, in small but meaningful ways, shape to her will. In doing so, she became not only a survivor of loss, but a master of her own destiny, quietly and brilliantly defying the limits others had placed upon her life. Life began to change for her in ways both subtle and profound. The moment she had spoken, her words of clever obedience had created ripples, but it was only the beginning. She realized that true power was not about loud gestures or dramatic defiance. It was about patience, strategy, and understanding the people and traditions around her. Every day became a practice in careful observation, measured action, and quiet influence. She moved with grace and intelligence, making choices that balanced respect for tradition with the emerging desire to shape her own life. She had learned that a life fully her own would not come from rebellion alone, but from wisdom, patience, and quiet courage. She continued to live among the people of her community, maintaining the outward appearance of obedience. She followed the customs expected of a widow, performing her daily tasks with diligence and care. She rose with the sun, tended the fields, prepared meals, and helped neighbors when they called. Yet behind the calm exterior, her mind was active and alert. She observed who held power, who could be trusted, and who could be influenced by careful words and actions. She understood that every gesture, every phrase spoken, and even every silence could carry meaning. By mastering these small, seemingly ordinary acts, she began to shape her own position in the world, creating freedom where it had seemed impossible. Her growing influence became visible to those around her, even if they did not immediately understand it. Younger women looked to her for guidance, seeing her strength and wisdom, though they might not have fully grasped the depth of her strategy. Some men began to respect her not just as a widow, but as someone whose decisions mattered and whose voice carried weight. She realized that influence could be quiet, and that subtle changes in perception could lead to significant power. She had learned that life was not simply about obedience or rebellion. It was about learning how to operate within a system while quietly bending it to serve one's own purpose. One of the most important lessons she learned was the power of timing. She discovered that certain moments required patience, while others demanded action. Speaking or acting at the wrong time could bring consequences, while choosing carefully could open doors previously closed. She became skilled at reading the subtle signals of those around her, the tone of an elder's voice, the glance of a neighbor, or the hesitation in someone's step. These small observations became her guide, helping her navigate the complex web of expectations and obligations. She realized that her intelligence and awareness were as vital to her survival as her physical strength and emotional resilience. Through this careful balance, she also began to redefine her own sense of self. She realized that obedience did not have to mean submission, and that tradition did not have to erase her individuality. She learned to honor her past, the memory of her husband, and the customs of her people while still asserting her own presence in the world. Her life became a delicate dance between duty and desire, expectation and independence. She discovered that she could maintain her dignity, pursue her own happiness, and still show respect for the structures that governed her life. This realization gave her a deep sense of confidence, one that radiated from her in every action, every word, and every glance. As she moved carefully through her community, she also began to help others in meaningful ways. She guided younger women, offering advice about managing households, understanding traditions, and navigating difficult social situations. She assisted neighbors with their work, offered care to those who were sick, and became a quiet source of strength for her village. These actions increased her respect and influence, and they also deepened her sense of purpose. She realized that true power was not about domination or control, but about creating a positive impact while maintaining one's integrity. Through service, patience, and wisdom, she became a pillar in her community, admired quietly by those who understood her journey. Her relationship with the man who had approached her earlier continued to grow, but it was carefully nurtured with respect and awareness. They shared moments of genuine connection, speaking openly yet cautiously, understanding the delicate balance required by their situation. She realized that trust and patience were more important than impulsive action, and that relationships could flourish even within strict boundaries if approached with care. The bond they developed became a source of strength for her, reminding her that human connection could exist alongside strategy and self-preservation. Through this relationship, she began to see that love, respect, and intelligence could coexist in a world governed by tradition, and that personal fulfillment was possible even under challenging circumstances. The elders and other authority figures in the village began to see her differently. While some remained cautious, many recognized her intelligence, patience, and quiet authority. They saw that she could navigate the expectations of a widow while still asserting her own sense of self. Slowly, their perception shifted from suspicion to respect. She had demonstrated that obedience did not equate to weakness, and that careful action could reshape relationships and social structures without direct confrontation. The subtle power she wielded became a model for others, showing that life could be lived fully even within strict societal limits. Her ability to influence without rebellion was a testament to her courage and wisdom. Even in moments of solitude, she continued to reflect on her journey. She thought about her husband, her past, and the lessons she had learned. She understood that grief, though ever present, no longer defined her entirely. She had learned to carry sorrow alongside strength, to honor her past while creating a future, and to navigate the delicate balance between duty and desire. Each day, she made choices that reflected her growing understanding of the world and her own capabilities. She realized that life was a continuous process of learning, adapting, and acting wisely, and that true freedom came from mastering these skills rather than rejecting them entirely. The community began to recognize her as a figure of quiet power. Her presence carried weight, her decisions were respected, and her guidance was sought by those seeking wisdom. She had become more than a widow defined by loss. She was now a woman who had mastered the art of navigating life within strict boundaries while still asserting her own independence. Her story spread quietly, inspiring others who had felt trapped by circumstance. People began to understand that strength did not always have to be loud or confrontational. It could be quiet, consistent, and thoughtful. Through her actions, she demonstrated that it was possible to live fully, honor tradition, and still shape one's own destiny. Her sense of self continued to evolve as she balanced her responsibilities, relationships, and personal desires. She discovered that true courage was not only about facing danger or hardship, but also about maintaining integrity, patience, and intelligence in the face of societal pressures. She learned to act decisively when the moment required it, and to wait with wisdom when patience was needed. Every choice she made became a reflection of her growing mastery of life, and she found that even within strict traditions, there were opportunities to assert independence, influence others, and pursue personal fulfillment. As seasons passed, she became a quiet force within her community. The younger generation watched her, learning from her patience, wisdom, and strategic courage. She became a model for what was possible when a person combined strength, intelligence, and respect for tradition. Her influence extended beyond her immediate actions, shaping the way others thought about obedience, independence, and the role of women in the community. She had discovered that real power lay in understanding the world, knowing oneself, and acting with both courage and discretion. Her ability to navigate life skillfully, without breaking rules or losing dignity, became a defining feature of her character. Despite the respect she had earned, she never lost sight of her own heart and desires. She continued to nurture her relationship carefully, honoring her feelings while remaining mindful of societal expectations. She understood that life required constant balance, and that personal fulfillment was as much about patience and strategy as it was about action. Her journey had taught her that freedom was not simply the absence of rules, but the ability to navigate them with wisdom, courage, and foresight. She had learned that a life well lived was one in which sorrow, love, duty, and independence could coexist harmoniously, each informing and strengthening the other. By living with awareness, purpose, and strategic patience, she had become a woman who quietly defied fate. Her life was no longer dictated entirely by tradition or expectation. She had discovered ways to shape her own path while respecting the structures around her. She had learned that true power was not always visible, and that quiet, consistent action could create profound change. Through careful observation, strategic choices, and the courage to act decisively when necessary, she had begun to claim her future, showing that even within the strictest boundaries, a determined and wise person could find freedom, influence, and fulfillment. Years passed, and her life became a testament to quiet courage and careful wisdom. The woman who had once been defined solely as a widow, expected to live within narrow boundaries, had grown into a figure of strength, respect, and influence. People in her community no longer whispered about her with suspicion or curiosity. They spoke of her with admiration and recognition. She had mastered the delicate balance between tradition and self-determination, showing that obedience could be a tool, not a prison, and that courage could be quiet yet powerful. Her presence, her actions, and her words carried meaning, shaping the perceptions and choices of those around her. She had become a symbol, not through loud deeds or dramatic gestures, but through a life lived with intention, patience, and unwavering integrity. Her home, once a place of sorrow and solitude, now radiated warmth and purpose. She had cultivated spaces where both life and memory could coexist, rooms filled with simple comforts, a garden tended with care, and areas where children and neighbors could gather. She shared her knowledge openly, teaching younger women the skills they needed to navigate the world with dignity, patience, and intelligence. She spoke of her experiences, of lessons learned through grief, patience, and strategic courage, always careful to communicate not as a preacher, but as someone who had walked the path herself. Her stories were not filled with grand heroics but with practical wisdom, and people listened because they could feel the truth behind every word. Her influence extended beyond her immediate surroundings. The younger generation, particularly women, began to see that their lives did not need to be confined by narrow definitions of duty and obedience. They saw in her a model for how to live fully, even within strict traditions, and how to claim personal freedom without dishonoring the past. She encouraged them to observe carefully, act wisely, and cultivate patience, showing that strength and influence could be achieved quietly, through thoughtfulness and consistency. Many of the lessons she imparted were subtle, embedded in daily life, yet they resonated deeply with those willing to learn. Her legacy was already taking root in the minds and hearts of her community, long before any official recognition could occur. Her relationship with the man who had approached her so many years ago continued to grow, shaped by mutual respect, patience, and understanding. Their bond was a partnership built on trust, careful consideration, and shared values. It was not a love driven by impulsive passion, but one rooted in experience, awareness, and emotional intelligence. Through this partnership, she demonstrated that companionship could coexist with independence, that connection did not require surrender, and that love could flourish even within the constraints of tradition. They supported each other, celebrated small victories, and faced challenges together, each step reinforcing the strength and wisdom she had cultivated over a lifetime. She continued to honor the memory of her husband, never forgetting the love they had shared and the life they had imagined together. That memory, far from holding her back, became a guiding force in her decisions and actions. She learned that honoring the past did not mean living in its shadow, but using its lessons to shape a stronger, wiser, and more purposeful present. The grief she once carried so heavily had transformed into a source of insight and empathy, allowing her to understand others' struggles and offer guidance and support. Her ability to channel sorrow into wisdom became one of her most remarkable qualities, earning her the respect and admiration of everyone who knew her story. The elders of her community, once strict enforcers of tradition and narrow expectations, had come to recognize her wisdom and influence. They saw that she could live within the customs they valued while subtly reshaping the perception of what was possible for women in their society. Her obedience, once a tool to protect herself, had become a demonstration of intelligence, patience, and courage. She had shown that strength did not require rebellion, but could be achieved through careful strategy, observation, and deliberate action. In doing so, she had quietly challenged old norms and created a space for others to follow, leaving a lasting impact on her community that would endure for generations. Her daily life remained filled with work, reflection, and connection, yet it was now guided by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. She tended to her garden, prepared meals, assisted neighbors, and taught lessons with a quiet authority. She spoke to others with kindness, wisdom, and subtle guidance, helping them navigate challenges and find their own strength. Every interaction, every choice, and every moment became an opportunity to lead through example, showing that courage, intelligence, and patience could coexist within the boundaries of tradition. She had discovered that leadership need not be loud or forceful. It could be quiet, consistent, and profoundly impactful. As time went on, the story of her life began to spread beyond her immediate village. Travelers, neighbors from distant communities, and young women seeking guidance came to hear her wisdom. She became known not only as a widow who had endured sorrow, but as a woman who had transformed her circumstances through intelligence, patience, and courage. Her influence reached those who had never seen her directly, inspiring them to rethink the possibilities in their own lives. Her legacy was not built on grand displays, but on the quiet accumulation of wisdom, careful action, and the demonstration that strength could coexist with respect for tradition. She also continued to cultivate her inner life, finding peace and fulfillment in reflection, meditation, and connection with nature. The hills, streams, and open skies that had nurtured her as a child remained her sanctuary. She would walk along the paths she had known for years, observing the wind, the trees, and the flow of water, reflecting on the journey she had taken. These moments reinforced her understanding that life was not simply about survival, but about awareness, wisdom, and the conscious shaping of one's path. She had learned to see the patterns of life, to understand the rhythms of human behavior, and to act with foresight and care. Her mind and heart had become finely attuned to both the world around her and the inner currents of her own spirit. Her actions and guidance began to inspire broader change in the community. The younger generation of women, in particular, began to adopt her methods of careful observation, patience, and quiet assertion of independence. They realized that strength did not always require confrontation or defiance. It could be built through intelligence, persistence, and subtle influence. She had created a model for living fully within tradition while still asserting personal agency. The values she embodied, courage, wisdom, patience, and respect, became a legacy that extended far beyond her immediate actions, influencing the lives of many who came after her. She had shown that a single person, through thoughtful and consistent action, could reshape expectations and inspire change without breaking the delicate balance of tradition. Even as she aged, she remained active, engaged, and purposeful. She continued to nurture relationships, teach lessons, and offer guidance, always mindful of the delicate balance she had mastered. Her presence became a stabilizing force in the community, a source of wisdom and reassurance for those facing challenges. People sought her advice not because they were compelled to listen, but because her experience and judgment carried undeniable truth. She had become a living example of resilience, intelligence, and strategic courage, demonstrating that even in a world bound by tradition, one could shape a meaningful and empowered life. Her story became a beacon for those who had felt constrained by circumstance, tradition, or expectation. She had endured profound loss, navigated societal pressures, and discovered the power of patience, strategy, and courage. Through her life, she demonstrated that it was possible to honor the past while asserting personal agency, to live fully even within limitations, and to inspire others through quiet yet consistent action. Her journey became a lesson for generations, showing that true strength is measured not only by the challenges one faces, but by the wisdom, courage, and integrity brought to each moment. She had transformed sorrow into purpose, obedience into strategy, and tradition into an opportunity for personal growth and influence. As the years continued, her legacy solidified. She was remembered not only as a widow who had endured loss, but as a woman who had shaped her own destiny with intelligence, patience, and courage. The people she had guided carried forward her lessons, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond the boundaries of her village. Her life became a story told with admiration and respect, a reminder that even in the strictest of circumstances, a determined and thoughtful individual could find freedom, influence, and fulfillment. Her example inspired others to pursue their own paths with courage and wisdom, demonstrating that life could be shaped, even in the presence of great expectation and societal constraint. In the final years of her life, she reflected on the journey she had traveled. She had endured grief, navigated complex traditions, and faced societal pressures with intelligence, patience, and courage. She had learned that freedom and influence could be achieved through careful observation, strategic action, and the quiet assertion of personal agency. She had cultivated relationships, guided others, and inspired generations, leaving a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. Her life was a testament to the power of resilience, wisdom, and quiet courage, showing that even within the strictest boundaries, a determined and thoughtful individual could create a meaningful, empowered, and inspiring life. Her legacy lived on not only in stories, but in the lives she had touched. The lessons she had imparted, the courage she had demonstrated, and the wisdom she had shared became a foundation for future generations. She had proven that life's challenges, no matter how severe, could be met with strategy, patience, and intelligence. Through her journey, she had shown that even in a world governed by tradition and expectation, one could find freedom, influence, and fulfillment. Her life became a shining example of how courage, wisdom, and quiet perseverance could defy fate, transform a community, and leave a lasting impact for generations to come.